Is the GameStop, Robin Hood, Wall Street Farrago an example of little guys winning against Wall Street?
GameStop up another 130% today.
It's like the villagers storming the castle.
Watching the little guy beat the big guy.
Also, is the real revelation that the stock market and the financial world is a big, rootless, groundless game. The whole thing, in fact, a scheme.
It is the story you could not avoid this week, and maybe the one you couldn't quite understand either. You're not alone.
So as far as I can understand it, and I've watched some great videos on this content, some of which there are links to in the description, is that people banded together on Reddit to reverse hedge funds that were going to collapse the value of GameStop, and in so doing created potentially a fortune and certainly created a crisis for the investors that were betting on GameStop's fortunes going down.
A David and Goliath tale of small investors on smartphones taking on Wall Street sharks and winning.
It's weird that the news is characterising Wall Street as, occupied by sharks, when in a sense the media, Wall Street and the state are all themselves the forces that align and interact to sustain the current power dynamic, whether that's in the financial world, the world of tech, the world of media, the world of politics. What you can loosely call the establishment are in allegiance with each other. Their interests align. There is a conspiracy by virtue of shared interest, if not a conspiracy by virtue of clandestine operations, although one would have to assume that many of the necessary operations are not publicly revealed.
It all began last year when individual investors on Reddit started noticing elite hedge funds like Melvin Capital were shorting GameStop stock, meaning they were betting on the shares losing value.
Don't it sort of bother you that there are people that just their whole world is mucking around in some imaginary fantasy, investing in stuff, and it's not real? I mean, didn't we learn anything in 2008 where like maybe 10% of the American workforce lost their job, where the government quantitatively eased an industry that by its own standards had totally failed? That these ideas continue, that we can't come forward as a culture and society and present different or better ideas. And the reason that we can't present these ideas is not because there aren't any better ideas, but because these ideas are stymied because they are in opposition to the interests of the powerful. The media, the state, the financial industry will ultimately collude in the oppression of any alternative ideology emerging. And even a blip on the radar, a temporary small victory such as this one, it's remarkable because it's an anomaly, but it's unsustainable because it's an anomaly occurring within a system that exists for its own self-preservation.
They made a bet and we called the bluff.
Bradley Lewis is one of scores of recreational investors who went the other way, purchasing 62 shares of GameStop 2 weeks ago using the popular fee-free trading app Robinhood. That Reddit-driven buying frenzy caused what's called a short squeeze, forcing those Wall Street giants to lose billions.
I've never understood that stock market, have you? This is the only way I can understand it. Is the point of the stock market was meant to be that you could invest in a company, the money you invested will be used by that company to create a better and bigger company, and then the profits accrued would be shared between the manufacturer and the investor. But at some point people realised, hang on a minute, we could invest in this company ourselves, make it seem like it's fantastic, create false value, get further investment, and then just nickel that investment. Now in 2001, this is when it reached a kind of nadir. Obviously it had done that periodically in the 1930s, and as Marx predicted, you can't have limitless capitalism, which makes sense in a very sort of simplistic, common sense, rational way, that you can't have endless growth on a finite rock. Even though much of this money is imaginary, it seems necessary that ultimately these markets will right themselves. But it seems that now what stock markets are, like when you watch it on the news and stuff, don't you always feel like, oh my God, what are they doing? Should these people be in charge of the most important aspect of our national life, our GDP, the way that a country's success is determined? Let's put these maniacs in charge of it that fly helicopters to strip clubs and do cocaine out of their own armpits. It's clearly not the thing that should be the spine of an economy. What's happened temporarily here in this GameStop issue is ordinary people on a chat board on Reddit have gone, hang on a second, we could get involved in this and make a quick buck. But ultimately, this is a casino, and as anyone who knows anything about gambling knows, the house always wins.
As the stock went viral, Robinhood and other platforms like TD Ameritrade suddenly restricted individual investors from trading GameStop and other hot stocks.
What does it tell us that Robinhood, the app that's supposed to be, as its name suggests, taking from the rich and giving to the poor, impeded and controlled the transactions around this, possibly because of their own provenance? Certainly they had allegiances and affiliations with all sorts of high-powered financial interests that mean it's unlikely that they ultimately will align themselves with their users. In fact, it was described to me that Robinhood is kind of like Facebook, i.e. if you don't pay for the product you're using, you are the product, in so much as Robinhood collate, curate and bundle and sell the information of its users to the very hedge funders that in this instance are being apparently usurped.
While the big institutions could stay in the game, unfettered.
You can see how their interests align by the way that they treat each other. When this happened, Robinhood shut shit down. The state will support that. Tech will support it. 100,000 negative reviews of the Robinhood app were removed by Google because there is an affinity and an affiliation between these people whose interests align. What this indicates is that we have a financial system that is untethered from reality. And if it's untethered from reality, how can it be socially responsible? It exists in its own, not necessarily cabal, but in its own community. It exists in its own ambience, in its own ecosphere. The City of London has its own sort of laws and jurisdiction, and I've often reflected, is that to protect the literal city from having responsibility and accountability to the nation and the world at large? It shows there is a sort of a transnational, globalized organisation that operates free from the kind of sovereignty of countries, or more important than the sovereignty to a country, which is in itself just a construct, responsibility towards ordinary people who cannot access this world, and if they even try to for a moment, they'll be closed down fast, as this story shows.
Armchair investors pledging to keep their fight up as Wall Street braces for another roller coaster week.
Keenan Malik in The Observer said, over the past 20 years, the 500 large companies listed on the stock exchange have spent $8.3 trillion buying their own stock to boost its price. A stock buyback, when a company purchases its own shares to reduce the number openly available and so to push the price up, is a form of market manipulation that was illegal in the US until Ronald Reagan decided that to ban it was to restrict market freedom. As a result, many corporations, instead of building factories, now plough money into their own shares. It has helped raise the stock market to record levels and provided shareholders with huge largesse, but few others have benefited. A pharmaceutical company, Merck, insists that it must charge exorbitant amounts for its medicines to help fund new research. In 2018, the company spent $10 billion on research and development and $14 billion on share repurchases and dividends. So even a company like Merck isn't really a medicinal development company. It's a financial company that exists for its own financial betterment as a priority, which you can see from its own figures. One report suggests that had Walmart diverted half the money it spent on stock buybacks into wages, and stock buybacks is this thing that artificially inflates the price, 1 million of its lowest paid employees, many of whom live below the poverty line, could have had a 50% pay increase. So in a sense, this wouldn't matter if it wasn't so integrally connected to the living standards of ordinary people, whether that's the people that work for Walmart or all of us that live in countries that bear the financial responsibility when inevitably these games, this gamified stock market, has real life consequences when the game crashes, because at some point the laws of reality have to intersect and you have to go, oh, this company isn't actually worth that. These mortgages aren't going to be paid back. You can't bundle them together with better mortgages and hope that somehow that'll rub off, that those other mortgages will be a good influence on the subprime mortgages. The reality at some point will assert itself. Byron Katie says, God is reality. The reality that we can experience emotionally, the reality that we can see. The stock market is a faith-based system, a confection, a construct, a concept that exists for its own benefit and the benefit of its participants, which in itself is elitist and exclusive and prevents people from outside it from benefiting. That's what systems do. They benefit participants and they control those that they seek to exclude.
For the bedroom-based traders, these are still risky investments, but many aren't worried about losing money. This is about power, not profit.
Oh, it's absolutely about principle. It's about sticking it to the man. That's 100% what it's about.
That lad's really enjoying it. And that kind of spirit is going to be necessary if ever we are going to create meaningful change. But what is it in our psyche that presumes that such unsustainable ideas can be relentlessly pursued? Why don't we address these problems? Here is some mythic analysis of the stock market which might show us why we're willing to entertain bogus, peculiar ideas such as limitless growth, even though they're palpably problematic. The symbolism of ascension, especially ascent far up into the sky, like you might see on a graph, limitlessly going up and up and up. Buy, sell, sell, expresses humanity's deep-seated yearning for absolute freedom and for deliverance from the cares and sorrows of earthly life. We long to be able to rise up out of this world of work, suffering and death into a heavenly state of freedom, ease and bliss. World religions, from the most archaic to the most advanced, abound in stories of culture heroes, spiritual leaders, or embodiments of the aspirations of the group who ascend to a higher world. The earth, which is the symbol and embodiment of drudgery and hard necessity, is left far below. Incredible as it may seem, the soaring stock market graphs have constellated this major archetype in people's minds. The stock market is today's magic stairway by which people imagine they will ascend into a heaven where all their dreams will be fulfilled and they and their families will live happily ever after. That's Anne Crittenden, The Stock Market Seen Today, a Jungian perspective. I suppose for any system to be able to abide, it must find its resource in the minds of humankind. Otherwise we would reject it. It would not be sustainable. There is something in us that thinks, yeah, you can create limitless wealth out of some made-up system. But this shows us too that we're already operating in the realm of our imagination with our most traditional and conservative systems, the heart of wealth creation. So surely then we can use the same imagination, the same rootlessness, the same blue sky thinking to create fairer, more just, more equal societies, more diverse societies where all of the various ways of living are accommodated and incorporated, where people from wherever they feature on the cultural or political spectrum can find the freedoms they crave, released from the tyranny and monoculture of nationalistic ideologies that exclude, deny and ignore people. None of us can truly be free as long as we live within entrenched systems that benefit elites.
Since 2008, it feels like Wall Street has had an overabundant harvest financed by public money, and rather than share the billions with the less fortunate, they've built bigger and bigger barns for themselves. And there was a part of me that thought, well, it will be fun to be a part of this moment.
Angus Cameron, in Money's Unholy Trinity, Devil, Trickster, Fool, points out that in Faust, Mephistopheles offers Dr. Faust, the hero of the book who sells his soul to the devil for magical powers, that what's the need to mine real gold when we can mine our own consciousness, when we can create money from nothing, when we can create value from nothing. There are mythic underpinnings for many of these ideas that we're seeing culturally played out. In the case of the Reddit players that got dug into this chaos, the trickster myth comes to mind. The central characteristic of the trickster is that he or she, and often they are androgynous, ambiguous characters, have no fixed nature. Just when we've decided they're a villain, they do something heroic. Just when we're sure they're a fool, they do something intelligent. Their one constant characteristic is appetite. They are governed by a desire to immediately satisfy their urges. Though the trickster is a troublemaker, their behavior is naive rather than mean. Their cruelty is that of a child, quite alarming at times, but not based on systematic viciousness. The trickster should be regarded as a naive character who does what others would never dare, blithely committing sacrilege and violating taboos. This trickster motif, I feel, is a psychic energy system that needs to be evoked to bring about change. We must find within ourselves a kind of amorphousness, a place that's neither this nor that. From this new source of energy, we can create real change, not further regulation, tweaks and modification in a system that is entrenchantly biased towards the privilege of existing elites. I'm not talking about privilege based on huge demographic swathes of the population who might fit one criteria but economically belong to another. I'm talking about real meaningful change. The GameStop incident is interesting because it shows what happens when people strike out against power. It shows you how power behaves, how power will collude to preserve its interests, how these systems are designed for one group of people, and if other people try to penetrate, they will be penalized. It shows you that if we are interested in meaningful change, it will come from outside of existing systems. systems. The existing systems of media, of our culture, of our politics, of our financial systems have no agenda other than the sustenance of this system at large. They are not interested in real change. They cannot deliver real change. They wouldn't do it even if they could. Ultimately, it will have to come from you. New movements from outside the system will have to be energized and unleashed. Good luck.